on this computer. We're starting. Thank you everybody for joining. So what we are hoping to trial today is how to use a timeline as a systematic way of thinking about the COVID crisis, right? The thing about the COVID crisis, unlike some other, you could say, important events like say a war or a depression, even though this might also lead to either or both of those, is that it seems to have a reasonably definite starting date and a potentially reasonably definite end date, right? Which is to say there was the day in which the first, you could say, infection was recorded, supposedly 31st December in Wuhan, but I think it must have happened a little bit before then. And there will be, you could say, the last person who is detected and is either cured or dies as a result of this virus, right? So to me, that's a bookend to the crisis itself. In the middle and plus minus a little bit, you will have other events that are very, very important, right? So in India, for example, this is going to intersect quite strongly with the food system. And the Kharif harvest is going to be disrupted. We don't know what they're going to do for food supply and food inflation. We also don't know how we're going to feed all the people who have lost jobs. So, so there are many, many allied events in the timeline that go along with the viral timeline itself. And so what we are thinking is we will go through an exercise where we pose how to respond to the COVID crisis individually and as organizations. So all of us are part of something or the other. How to respond to the important events in the crisis based on the data that we're going to share, and what you could say mental models and tools for thinking can be used to align with each other, right? So that what you're working on is explicitly related to what others are working on, even if you're doing different things. And so I'm going to ask Sriram to share a few thoughts on the data. And you please feel go ahead and you can share your screen or use whatever means you want to. And you can also, you're muted, you can also decide whether you want questions during or after.
So yeah, so I should say that I joined this group a little bit later than probably everyone else. So at the time I joined, this is the spreadsheet that was being constructed. So maybe even before I start, maybe Rajesh, can you give some, I mean, is it worthwhile to talk about the genesis of this spreadsheet, or it's not relevant for the purposes of this recording?
I think, I mean, we can say that the idea of the spreadsheet was to put all the global, India and state dates relevant to the crisis. And that was the genesis of this group itself. And you sort of came into the group on the second round. So you didn't miss much. And so, it's not as if we have done a huge amount of work either. So,
yeah. So as you can see, I mean, the spreadsheet was collecting data about, as far as I could see, 4 things. One is sort of what's being called relevant international events. So the first K is what is the WHO when it did organize the pandemic, when it labeled it as a pandemic, etc. When did the Epidemic Diseases Act get invoked and things like that. So some very important milestones in the progression of the pandemic. Then in addition, Arundhati has been, I guess, collecting data about 2 things: monsoon or weather related events that are likely to happen in the future and potentially intersect with the disease progression itself, and also impact on food, the cycle of food, which Rajesh, food production, which is the Kharif crop, and what will happen. And then Janvi has been collecting information about generally what are the responses of the government in both the center and a few states. So this was the data set that was given, and Ram has been collecting information about what are the number of cases that have been reported and how is it changing over time. So that was the spreadsheet that was given. So I the first thing I said was, as a spreadsheet, clearly it's very difficult to make sense of it together. And so it requires some kind of way of putting it into a visualization. And so as a first pass, what I did was I'll show what I did. And in the process, I realized even before we do this more seriously, we need to come up with certain schemes ourselves. So this is what I sent to everyone. So this is basically the spreadsheet uh, put in as a timeline, or so basically this is something which you can scroll around, zoom in, and things like that. So it's been divided into various categories that you can see here. And of course, these are things I've put in. We can make more categories, come up with more informative categories. So that is something we should discuss. And the idea is that at least for some of those things where there was a reference available, if you click on it, it will open the corresponding reference and things like that. So that's just the first pass. And at least to give people a sense for one way of projecting the data that we're collecting. And so just playing around with this, I was now I was sort of a version, let's say this is version 0.1. 0.1.1 is a different software which makes a different timeline, which I think is a little bit nicer. So I'm just getting used to it, trying to see what it can be done. Again, the same idea, different interface, but I think it's because we'll probably have a very dense time points. This actually does a better job, I feel. And this again, you can zoom in, zoom out, and the same thing. So, so this is perhaps something
which software is this?
This is also R. I'm using a different package. So this is using then Plotly for plotting. So, so the question is, okay, so in the process of making this, I realized that this kind of, so this is the data set, I mean, the original spreadsheet, it's being compiled by different people. And just to make sure that everything in the same format and is consistent took me about a day and a half. So we need to evolve some kind of a consistent format, just so that any kind of further analysis can be, or plotting or any of the things can be done. And so this is what I came up with, and this we can modify. Or so I just came up, so basically coming up with a data schema. And this I mean, just in the process of thinking about today's session, I realized that there are some things which are missing in this. But just to give you a sense for, okay, how do you think about the timeline? A timeline is a set of events. Each events can be of two types. One way is it's like a point, it's an instant. So on this day, this happened, or this time something happened, or something which is going to happen over an interval of time. So, so something like, so somebody had mentioned the day Kharif crop starts is early May. So it's not one day, but it's over, let's say, a period of a week. So there are two kinds of things which we need to put in. So therefore, you need a start date, and if you have time information, time, and end date and end time. So those are the two things. For some things, like somebody had put in early May as the best way of describing the time period. That's not an exact time. So the time label is kept to they handle those kinds of cases. And in terms of what is the nature of the event, I thought there should be a summary, like something which can be captured in a few word, or preferably 2 words or 3 words, that can be put in this kind of a diagram, because otherwise it becomes too dense. And then a detailed description of whatever you found. And if there is a source, like a newspaper article or online, so that this should be put in separately, so that it's just easier to programmatically put this in the right place. And I also added this column called importance, because you may want to have a sense for some events are more important than others. and then we'll figure out what to do with this. And also category of a certain, what do I call, information type. Is it a news article? Is it a press release? Is it a sort of a government a diktat or some kind? So we can sort of put that. I mean, that was the idea of this column, and just generally who's collected the data, and some comments. If you want to have some free-form comments which are not handled by any of the other things, we can put that in there. So this is just my preliminary schema. And we can, of course, think about what to do. But at least I feel if all of us maintain a consistently add to this spreadsheet, the order of the dates don't matter because we can always sort it and or whatever, sort it. And if you just want to look at your data set, we can all do all kinds of filtering. So it's not that hard to handle those cases. But I also felt, so if you come back to this visualization, one of the things that is missing, and I guess that is one way to think about it, is events in the agriculture will impact, let's say, what's going to happen to the economy or something like that. But these kind of relationships are not captured. So some kind of cross-referencing will have to be put in. And so that's one thing we need to think about. And of course, the other obvious missing thing is, let's say, some sense for the progression of the disease itself. So how do you plot it on the same set of same scales? I'll have to think about that a bit. And finally, one of the things which is missing, which will become, I think, increasingly important, is what's going to happen to the health infrastructure itself. The cases are steadily rising. So what's going to happen? So I guess that's what I will. I'll stop here, and I will let me if there are any questions or comments, or if there's something else which was probably I should talk about.
So I just have a very brief comment, which is I agree. I think that this new representation is better than the previous one. And we may want to think about how these cross linkages, right? Let's say between, the delay of the Kharif harvest and availability in mandis to, all of those, how to even start thinking about those cross linkages in a way that can be communicated well. Because this, for example, is easy to understand, but I don't know how we can make those linkages also equally easy to understand.
Yeah.
I just had a question. I think in our last meeting, you rightly pointed out that states can have very different progressions. Geographical areas can have very different, and it really makes sense to see them differently. How would that work in something like this?
So I mean, eventually, again, this was just a first pass. Ideally, you can have different tabs for each state. So, which would be assuming we have enough data. I mean, now, for example, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, you have enough cases that you can maybe start making those kinds of, there's even perhaps district level information available, which is not one or two. So I think that would be the way to go. So that is all possible. So this can, I mean, that's the next level of interaction to add, is what you can, basically by clicking something, it will show or make it disappear. These are all things can be done.
So that will just basically get added to that schema as location, as it will become.
No. So that is, no, so the data set will have everything. That's the original. But when you use in the user interface, you can select what you want, and we can decide, should we do it by state, or, I mean, so that's those are the sort of things. What is the information? So different people may be interested in different sets of information also. So those kinds of things. Somebody may not care about. I mean, they are more interested in looking at what are the economic impacts. So they may not care about what advisories the government has put in. So they may not want that to be shown. Because, and I also assume we may come up with more categories sooner or later. So that's also something. So this, I mean, once it goes beyond a screen, it's also loses its. It's right now, at least for me, it fits in my screen. So you can sort of get a sense for what's happening. Rajesh, you're muted.
I was saying that this is really, really good. I mean, exactly right. That if we think about this in a way that is cognitively transparent, so we don't have too many horizontals cluttering the interface, but yet there's a way to programmatically add or remove elements. So you are interested in Kerala and all the variables only Kerala related. That should be possible. Right. And to me, that is the kind of thing that will be very useful for organizations to then tweak and say, okay, we are going to add our timeline into this structure. Right.
Yeah. And ultimately, I would also, I mean, eventually, and see, people don't like tables, but I mean, a spreadsheet is actually quite information dense. It's just, so you can download all of this through, I mean, we can share our spreadsheet eventually.
Exactly.
It's
Any other
amazing.
questions?
This is really awesome.
Yeah. So it would be good to, I mean, of course, we'll have to think about what are the intersection, what are the categories we should think about, and of course, we need to keep adding events. I mean, the data about cases can be automated, but this news feed and all that we'll have to. I mean, not doing any AI machine learning, so it will not automatically read and start populating.
Right. So may I ask Ram and Alok to see if there is a way to, so let's say that there is a master data set which has everything. So it's a spreadsheet. And I know Ram is a great aficionado of spreadsheets. But it would be good to be able to programmatically say, here are my interests, give me the timeline associated with my interests, to which I can also add if necessary, right? So something that is a two-way interface. If there's a way for us to imagine what that design might look like, we should be able to, I think, implement it programmatically.
So I had a point about, I mean, I'll come to your point, Rajesh. But before that, I just wanted to say that this is really interesting and helpful, and I'm sure we can build a lot of things on this. And as I was looking at this, this reminded me of Tableau and the functionalities that offers. When Sriram was saying that we, different people in the group could pick and choose which component they want to add, and I think if will it make sense to use that sort of a platform, or because I don't know R or I don't know any sort of programming, so that becomes a handicap. Uh, um, so there's that element, and the other thing was that of course it'll depend on who is looking at the data and who is our target audience, and I mean that'll make a difference what sort of components we're choosing. But within this story, I feel one thing which is missing is uh, maybe some sort of a proxy to gauge what effect it's actually having on people, because we know that if we're talking about Indian economy, it's probably a really large, I mean, it's a macro view. It's probably a 30,000 view, to borrow your words, Rajesh, 30,000 feet view. So can there be another proxy or another metric which we can use to capture an actual human experience, maybe some proxy, people traveling, or what sort of things they were buying or not buying during this time? Because we know we know that these GDP numbers don't exactly uh, carry that same sense of what our lives, uh, our experiences are.
So it could be the infamous onion sales, or like something which is such a staple that it gives proxy for consumer confidence or something like that.
Maybe LPG cylinders, their sales going down or going up in this time, or something of that sort. which we can plug in and or maybe someone else in the group could make some sense out of it.
So I think there's clearly structured data and clearly unstructured data, and the exploration of these two categories will it's great to sort of mesh them. But I think since we started with the spreadsheet and we started in a very structured manner, I don't know, Sriram, correct me if I'm wrong, like maybe those two categories of data can exist separately and then you can sort of synthesize them somehow. And unstructured, of course, requires, like Sriram just mentioned.
I'm not sure what you mean by unstructured data. So I don't know if anything else was collected besides what was on the spreadsheet that I saw. The spreadsheet, of course, I mean, had a clear structure to it. There was at least a time axis and various information put for each in various categories. So that I would say is enough structure. Now, if you want to add things which are important or relevant, but don't necessarily have a specific time, and there's a few things like that about a report about hospital beds in India, which are not, which is true, which was basically a slightly older article, I think. So which is not completely current. So we can't put it on this timeline, but it is sort of tells you where you're starting from and things like that. I think the point is, what I would say is unstructured data is in what's, I mean, if it is basically saying that, let's say it's just text or some article or some essay that somebody has written, one way to structure is that it was written on this date and we can plot it on a timeline, or it could just be even what Alok pointed out. We could have a category about human stories or something like that, or just articles about, I mean, like, migrant workers walking back, or a few articles on those, then something else about NGOs working with delivering food to these people who are stuck and things like that. So that we can have an axis. So we can show that this article was published and have a link, but the content of the article will not be analyzed in any way, at least.
I'm guessing RAM means unstructured equals without a numerical value. But Ram, you can clarify exactly what, because I think unstructured has a specific connotation in the data science world.
Yeah. No, I meant the kind of things that Alok was talking about may not fit neatly into these into these categories, and it could be hard to. And I agree basically with what Sriram just said, that they are fundamentally sort of different. So you can put, I don't know what the value of the date of an article being published. You're actually talking about what the article is talking about. I mean, that's sort of the. So I'm suggesting that maybe it's a parallel thing. But I think Alok has something to say.
So I just wanted to say that what I meant was maybe plug in something like an HDI, a Human Development Index, or a Gini index, or something of that sort, because we know that GDP numbers don't they're not very reliable when we try to capture a common man's life.
Sorry, I misunderstood. Okay.
So, I didn't explain it very well.
Very good. So this is a great start. So maybe we can all, just meditate on this a little bit and then get back to Sriram on how the timeline can be restructured, to use a term that we've been using again and again. But basically the idea being, what might be a way to represent the timeline in a manner that gives a specific audience the numbers and the progression that they are looking for, right? And so, so this is sort of our design problem. Okay. Now I'm going to invite Ram and Alok to take us through the Sensome exercise.
I'll just share a video first, Alok.
Okay.
I didn't catch it. Are you going to share, Ram?
Yeah,
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll just share a little video to just sort of frame the conversation that's going to follow, which is also going to be extremely different from the conversation that we just had. And just to just put it in context, I'd just like to share this little video. Please let me know if the sound doesn't play. Try to play it again, but there are subtitles.
That I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody. You'll be pleased to know, and I continue to shake hands. And I think it's very important that we, people obviously can make up their own minds. I think that Matt has said that people must make up their own minds, but I think the scientific evidence is, well, I'll hand over to the experts. But our judgment is wash. Washing your hands is the crucial thing. Yes. Before you shake hands, obviously.
Yeah. So while I wait for Alok to share, the point of that clip is actually to the point of sharing that clip was actually to draw attention to the fact that sometimes we miss a lot of the picture if you only look at the data. And there's this huge human component that can have an incredibly massive effect on events as they unfold. So what we just saw, and we hope he recovers and in time, but was a very curious case of an advanced nation with perhaps the best tools to analyze data and sort of considered to be fairly evolved, make a series of rather disastrous mistakes. And the question is, why? What are the factors that led not just Boris Johnson, but millions of Britons to not take coronavirus seriously enough, despite the reports that were coming from the rest of the world? And the cost of that might actually be thousands of deaths. So was it possible to have, in a sense, war gamed that scenario out? Is it possible to look at these soft, difficult, hairy kind of inputs into the kind of toxic situations that coronavirus creates and anticipate them? So we are trying to, at Socrates, trying to evolve a tool that helps us do this. This is a very early stage. So what you're going to see is sort of a very rough draft attempt at helping people discuss things like emotions and sensory states, cultural predilection, things that one might struggle to fit into a data set, and make it possible for these things to concretely be discussed by a group. It can be very difficult just in speech to talk sensibly about things like these. So this tool is our first attempt at very simply trying to make these emotions visible or manifested so that we could discuss them. So what we see here is a kirana store in India, and the larger problem we're going to discuss is the COVID crisis in India. And within that, we chose this as sort of an arena of exploration because prior to Corona, millions of Indians used to visit this spot, the kirana store. And it's also where millions of Indians come into contact with each other. So we thought it's just sort of apt to make this our base in our exploration of the way people might begin to start feeling about coronavirus, and hopefully see if it leads us to any insights into what future behavior might be. So we can actually start by just asking people, how do they think this scene is going to change or has already changed because of Corona? And I would like to tag Janvi and ask her to contribute her thoughts on how she thinks the scene will change or has changed.
So, I think the number of people inside the store would reduce drastically. And I'd like to quote from real life examples. So, in some of the tier 2 cities, I've heard from people first-hand accounts. They've said that the stores or the kirana stores, they've shut down completely, and people just go. They give a call and they read out the list of items that they want to purchase, and then the store owners, they come from inside. They deliver the goods. People just pick it up and leave. So it's like a queue system that sort of happens. So maybe the concept of a store itself is reimagined. It's more a place for a storing of goods rather than for people to come and walk through it.
So Janvi, I'm having a hard time hearing you. So maybe I don't know. Yeah.
Hello, I'm on a spotty network. It's been draining on and off, and I'm running on the inverter. Is this more audible now? Hello?
Yes. Yes. It's
Yes.
better.
Okay. Okay. So should I repeat the whole thing or?
I heard most of it, but some of it, like when you were saying, after you said that people will come and deliver the list, whatever you said after that, I didn't hear.
Yeah, so people just come, the store owners, they just give the goods to the people who are waiting outside. The people just pick them up and leave. So I think the concept of stores as a place where people go and browse through and pick and choose their brand, their preferred brands and choices, that would probably change. It would is my initial thought.
Ram, you're muted.
Ram, you're muted.
Sriram, could we get your thoughts on how you think the scene will change?
I mean, I have very similar thoughts, but I thought was already the custom in some sense. If you have a largish order, that you, I mean, first of all, you could give a call in or give a list, and it would even get delivered to your home. If it's a long time, if it's a store which you have a long-term relationship.
Sriram, 1 second. Not delivered to the house. People just go to the store and they wait outside.
Yeah.
The store.
So,
yeah. Same thing.
Yeah. So, but I also feel I'm wondering if one of the things about kirana stores is that you get a lot of items which are not prepackaged into appropriate quantities, like rice or dal. Whether that practice will disappear. Because you don't know you're concerned about who's touched the food item or something like that. And also, I mean, that's the first thing, that's one of the things I thought about. And, but I also feel my sense is that maybe in a year's time, I think it will be, people will come back to usual ways. So I don't know if much will change.
Alok, would you like to have a go?
So, I mean, Sriram, that's like we're cognizant of the fact that it's a temporary thing, and again, this is not trying to provide an architectural solution to this, but it's also it's just a way for us to be able to vocalize some of those feelings and capture things which cannot be captured in a data otherwise. I feel that when we're talking about people can order things and people can call in and have things delivered, the thing is that who is doing that, who can afford to do that? And does this mean that the middle class, which is already living in its own bubble of air-conditioned cars and private vehicles and moving from an air-conditioned house to an air-conditioned office, is it going to further segregate itself and leave the so-called riffraff, which I mean, it's not their problem. They did not bring it to India, but they're going to be left to, to deal with the outcome of this entire thing, and they are the ones who will not be able to call in, who will still have to endure. Um, yeah, I mean, that those are my initial thoughts, Ram.
Rajesh? Would you like to-
So as Alok and Sriram were speaking, one thing that came to my mind was if richer people who actually have a problem either with the sanitary or social distancing or whatever aspects of the kirana store are going to stop going there. Um, and some of them will still continue have it be delivered. Others may just start going to a Reliance Fresh, whatever, some bigger, what they trust as a more secure location, right? And one, if the demographics of who uses kirana stores changes, um, that may lead to an entirely, like, meaning, I think kirana stores are already threatened. And so if people with money stop going to kirana stores, I'm wondering what that's going to do to this, this as an institution, right? And I'm thinking not just a kirana store. There could be, like in Bangalore, we have all these darshanis, and darshanis are also a place where people sort of congregate and eat dosas and idlis in pretty close proximity. And I go to darshanis all the time when I'm there, but I'm wondering if people of our class will stop doing that.
So one thought I had was, and it's already started happening, is people have started drawing markings on the floor where people are allowed to stand and separating people out, and sort of creating this uh, new personal space that Indians actually sort of traditionally never had. Um, Oftentimes you get into a bus and maybe the bus would be empty and the next person who gets in will sit next to you. And this was sort of not strange. And I wonder if such habits would change. This is just another sort of view of the same Kirana store with these personal space bubbles, which might be this new, or may not be in the future, sort of feature of the Indian psyche. Would anybody like to comment on this?
Yeah, Ram, I've seen this in the supermarket close to home as well, where I went to get my supplies. So there were markings for people to just enter the store like 1 meter apart and numbered. And inside the store as well, there's like people. They let only a limited number of people inside to ensure that there's no crowding and stuff. So, and yeah, and there are many apartment complexes here which have done like a complete lockdown. So that's creating like small spaces within themselves, and they are not letting anyone inside. Like, they have very strict regulations on delivery. Even if you have something delivered, you have to go and collect it at the gate. So in terms of people sort of socially isolating themselves in terms of their class, I think that's already happening.
But one thing I felt, if I may add, is so the neighborhood store I visit, I mean, most of the stores, especially because Face is a premium, the aisles are very narrow. So it's impossible to have these kinds of social distancing unless you limit basically 3 people at any time or something inside. And so my sense is that I don't know if, and it's not as if vertical is an option here. So I don't know what can be done in terms of a design to make the space available. I don't know what can be done except to limit number of people.
I think in a different conversation, I heard that stores are hiring guards to do exactly that, right? Which is basically capping the
Yeah.
number. So,
Yeah.
um, and but one thought that came to me when I heard Jahnavi speak about the stores already, I mean, like this kind of distancing, and also happening inside gated communities and other places. I mean, India has a space crunch, right? And so if you increase the average distance between two people in some locations, you might be forced to decrease it in other locations. And I'm wondering, who is going to get even more packed in authoritarian ways as a result of this? Maybe not right now, immediately, but it may be a long-term impact that poorer communities are actually remapped into, like there are circles put into the entire city as to where you can stand and sit and live and whatnot in an even more marked way than it is today.
It's a lot like the Hunger Games, if you guys have seen or read the books.
I haven't read the Hunger Games. Maybe I should.
There are 12 sectors, and people are classified into these sectors, and there's strict rules by which, there are area demarcations, and people are not allowed to move between the sectors unless it is approved by the higher authorities and all that.
Okay.
So one of the things also that mentioned is people might become very sensitive of areas that are touched by other people, which also is another sort of thing that we're not necessarily very well known for. And sort of this feeling that, something that the sort of germophobic feeling that perhaps more Western countries are very familiar with. Will that enter the country? That's a question.
So these are the red marks are where the surfaces are where people touch objects, right? Or are actually even lean their elbows or things like these are surfaces for support, surfaces for exchange of money. Yeah, I actually just got an email from someone who I respect a lot, who said that he's an older man, and he said that he's worried that like there have been, for other reasons, he's been getting lots of packages every day, and and their surfaces have been touched by probably lots of people on the way to his place, and he's worried that he might be infected as a result of that. And so this concept of common surfaces which are allowed for various purposes. I don't know. I think that it'll be interesting to see if those surfaces now are no longer surfaces of exchange, but start getting reused for other things.
One question I have is what effect people have started wearing masks? It's a two-part question. What effects do the masks have now, and will people continue to wear them for some time? I now have noticed post-SARS, you constantly see, for example, these stations still sporting masks. Potentially, is that something that could enter our social life? And if so, what sort of effect could wearing masks have on, say, your relationship with this Kirana store owner? Janvi, can I ask you to reflect?
I think the masks have become a norm these days. Whenever I step out, I see almost everyone has a mask on, either a homemade mask in which people just tie on a scarf or some piece of cloth, or the disposable mask. or the surgical grade masks. So one question I've always had is, are people reading through enough literature on what is the kind of masks that they're supposed to use? Because I think there's the N95 grade mask, which keeps the virus effectively out. And masks are supposed to be, the disposable ones are not supposed to be reused, and etc. So it comes with an economic cost as well, because the price of mass has gone up in the last 45 days. So I've thought about like whether people are actually thinking through it, or they're just giving in to the panic, or the accepted social norm. Like even in supermarkets, you're not allowed in unless you're wearing a mask. So that is my first thought. And regarding the surfaces, several people have actually started sporting gloves.
Jamie, we lost you again.
Sorry. Am I audible now? Yeah. So I was talking about surfaces. Some people have started wearing gloves as well, but it's a trend that has not yet caught on. Not sure how that will pan out.
I wonder, I mean, one of the things, especially I guess from this image is, I don't know if it was, can I speak out of turn?
You want to go?
Yes, absolutely, please.
Yeah, is whether cash transactions will start going down, because one of, I mean, more digital ways of paying.
Is there a possible future in which a cash transaction will be viewed with like a smidge of disgust? Somebody offers you sort of soiled banknotes.
Yes.
So, may I, Ram?
Yes, please. Let's really.
Okay. So, as much as we would want to move to a cashless transaction, the latest trends are people are actually dealing in cash more, because most payments get locked in the bank account for people, and given the fear and mistrust with the economy and the way banks have been handled lately, people are going more for um, uh, cash transactions, or at least that's what they prefer. Uh, Doing online banking, or a cashless transaction, also means that you will at some point have to go to the bank, then again stand in a queue or get into close proximity of people, and also risk the fact that if the market crashes tomorrow, or if there's another similar yes bank kind of scam, then your money is stuck. So it's a weird situation, and that we're in. And about masks, we've obviously talked about this earlier, that in another conversation, that it contributes to the mistrust that we have for everyone around us. You don't see facial expressions. I wonder what it's also doing to some of the Muslim folk who have already been targeted, and then on top of that they wear a mask, which may further alienate them for a lot of people looking at them, because they're now devoid of facial expressions and a smile, which might be a casual exchange even without exchanging words. We saw in another conversation yesterday that a lot of black people here in the US uh, want to, like, it's not as easy for them to wear masks, because they know that there is already mistrust around them, and this entire white women thing, that if they see a black person walking on the sidewalk close to them, they'll clench their purse a little more tightly. So what will happen when you add a mask on top of that? And another public health thing, observation that I had was how readily, like, now we've accepted masks, although in Delhi, given the extent of air pollution last year, uh, like, people were really reluctant in wearing masks, and then there were all these public health experts who were talking about cultural differences between Asian nations and South Asian countries, where they wear masks more. Like, there isn't that much of a reluctance, but now suddenly Indians have also shifted to wearing masks, and both the problems are equally invisible. Like the probably air pollution is slightly more visible than coronavirus. So when we talk about tangible outcomes of certain things, people often say that climate change is an invisible problem, so we don't act with same urgency. But in this case, it's equally intangible, it's equally invisible, but yet we are acting. So there's a component of behavioral change as well overnight. Rajesh.
Thanks. And given in the interest of time, I would suggest that after I say a couple of things, we wind down the sense home exercise. The first thing that was coming to my mind is, if cash is, on the one hand, its use is increasing and it's also being seen as a suspicious, something that could be contaminated, there is a new startup or whatever market to be created in cash. Something that a spray on cash, right? Something that you can, before you hand a 100 rupee note to somebody, you put a little, you blow on it, or do some ritual that purifies that note. I feel like there is a little performance art to be created there. That was.
So it's kind of, what the hand sanitizer basically is that. So you don't purify the note, you purify your hands.
Okay. So that's the thing. So before cash transactions, you purify your hands, you hand the note, and then you give the hand sanitizer to the other person, and they. This will be an interesting ritual if it catches on. That's all I have. I really didn't have a serious point to make at this stage about that.
I did see one video of one transaction in a bank where someone was taking a check with a pair of tongs, and then they place it on their desk and then they iron it before touching it.
Achha.
Ispalji had shared that.
I see. The other similar kind of hokey thing I was thinking, like our penchant of handing over suitcases full of notes for corruption, it'll be interesting to see what happens to that. But I think that is anyway no longer happening. I think that they are way ahead in how the cash transfer happens. Okay. Ram, do you want to close off this discussion with any final points?
Yeah, so there's just sort of a question whether we end up with a Kirana store like this, where sort of contact is minimized, interacting through a screen, and whether this is really a far-fetched scenario, or will we start seeing some Kirana stores turning into this? And so the thought I'd like to leave us with is, what does this do to us as a society? And can we actually take such an exercise of thinking through a scenario and actually get something actionable, in terms of taking decisions tomorrow about how we respond to the corona crisis, and to convert sort of a free-ranging exploration into something that could be actually practically used when making decisions in the future. That's it.
Yeah, I personally think some places, whether Kirana stores or not, there will be some storefronts which will have this kind of almost militarization happen. I don't know which ones. And it also, it's not clear if it will happen through these physical interventions or the way things often happen in India, where there's a human being who's there to enforce certain norms of behavior. I don't know. But what is coming to me from the combination of the two exercises, the data one and the you could say the human subjective feelings one, is if as organizations we want to address concrete challenges, and we were going to have to be very thoughtful about these both, you could say, quantifiable and non-quantifiable ways in which our society is going to react. And that's going to be true, I think, as long as we are only in emergency response mode, right? So you are handing over cash to laborers, or you are making sure that elderly people who are staying alone are okay. I mean, until then, we could handle it on without this kind of thoughtful thinking through of the future. But I feel like once we step outside that zone, uh, we we really need to have a mindset that says that the system is going to respond in unpredictable ways, and we are going to have to be very careful about how to approach our response. Janvi, do you have any parting thoughts for us?
It's a useful exercise to begin with, but like you mentioned, there are a lot of variables, like it's quite unpredictable. So how do we take this exercise forward?
That's a question. Yeah, it comes to me too. Sriram?
No, I remember this. I don't know. I want to share this, maybe somewhat slightly frivolous, this link. So my sense is that so there was this image which was circulating of this ration shop using a set of tubes to actually supply grains. So it's so the distance.
Let's see it on the screen if possible.
You can share it.
I can share it on my screen.
So something like this, right? They are coming up with jugaad solutions to this problem of maintaining distance without while carrying out transactions. So I have a feeling things like this will happen rather than very organized barricades. Yeah.
Regard the virus. I mean, I actually think this. I mean, this is in some ways so much more heartening than the kind of militarized solutions that we were thinking about. Alok, any parting thoughts?
Um, yeah, I mean, that other solution is actually more humane, the one that Sriram just shared. And I mean, it clearly shows that there are directions in which we're not thinking yet, and people are already, I mean, people who are dealing with this on a daily basis are already finding these frugal solutions to these problems.
Ram?
Oh no, not really. I think pretty much covered it. The future is unknown. Let's see where it takes us.
So one thought I want to end with is that, especially if you're going to share this with a bigger group, with many, many more people, it might be useful to design an explicit exercise that starts with the facts, the data, then does an imaginative exercise with the sense home, and then deliberately evokes imaginations of the future, right? Because that's where we want to be. So I would love it if you guys have thoughts on what we like, something that is a little bit structured that we could run with in a week from now, essentially. That would be great. And then we can basically do 10 minutes each, or slightly plus minus, and see where that goes. Thank you, everybody. And thanks for participating. Sriram, thank you so much for the data work, and Alok and Ram for the work on the Sensome, and Janvi for all the work you've done on bringing the government data into the picture. Bye.
Everyone, thanks.
Bye. Thank you.